If you've watched any video about Fusion, one thing that you'll realize is that Fusion can seem pretty complicated, and to be honest, there's a lot of stuff going on within Fusion because it has the potential of doing just about anything, and we use this tool to make tons of things, different types of VFX compositing to motion graphics and just about anything you could really think of doing. But one thing that's a struggle is when you first get into it, trying to watch some content and getting a grasp of how everything works. And by watching this, hopefully, maybe you'll understand it a little bit better or not get lost in the details in which they graced over. So, without further ado, let's get started. Explore a wide selection of pre-made creative tools for DaVinci Resolve, like titles, transitions, slideshows and infographics like bar charts and callouts, and much, much more. Link in the description for more information. Alright, so to get started, we first need to get some content into Fusion. Now, there's a couple of different ways you can do this. One, you can just grab your footage, you can bring it onto your timeline, and you can pick out the portion that you actually want. So let's say we have a whole timeline, and let's say this is the clip that I want to use. If we want to take it in with the native clip itself, we can do that. There are a couple of caveats to that though. One, the in and out points are going to be based on where the cut markers are. So it'll take the whole clip in, but it'll have in and out points. I'll show you that in a second. The other way that we can do it is, let's say we have another clip here. We could right click and we could go to new Fusion clip, which will then turn it into a Fusion clip, which is a Fusion comp timeline. So it takes that particular clip, it puts it onto a timeline of itself, and then that timeline goes into Fusion. So what this does is, let's say we have some type of, let's get another one so I can show you here. Let's say that this clip here, we want to use some zoomed in portion of, let's say, this porta potty, right? And I turn this into a Fusion clip. Now this clip will go in based on the frame rate and resolution of the timeline. It'll take those parameters and go into Fusion with that, with this crop, okay? So we have these couple, and then the other thing that we can do, so we have two so far, we can add a new Fusion comp, right? And we can pick the resolution, or excuse me, the frame rate and the time. So let's say we'll make this 10 seconds long, right? Hit create, it's right here, we can drag this down. So it's just three ways. Fusion clip, the clip itself that's already on the timeline, or we can do a Fusion comp. So let's go into Fusion, and let me show you the difference between the two Fusion clips first. So to see all of the stuff on the timeline, we would need to click on clips, and the one that starts up when you go into Fusion is all based on where your playhead is. So my playhead was at the beginning of the project, so that's why we're at the first clip here. So here we have the first Fusion clip, right, with the full thing. And these are 4K clips, but we can see up here that it says 1920 1080. So it's grabbing that 4K clip, putting it onto a 1080 timeline, and then displaying that 1080 timeline in Fusion. We come over to that second clip that we had, that zoomed in area. What we can see here when we come in a little bit is that zoomed in area there, and we have 1920 1080. So it's taking that zoomed in area, then after we turned it into a Fusion clip, so whatever was visible then becomes a timeline and a clip itself that then comes in. Or like this one that we didn't do anything to, this comes in as the 4K clip. Now, I know that I'm kind of going all over the place. I just want to let you know that these different ways exist. The difference with this one is, remember we cut the clip up a little bit. So here is the in and out frames for it. So it starts at frame 156 and it goes to frame 163, compared to that same clip over here, starts at frame 0 and it goes to 307. Just letting you know that all of these different ways exists. Now, if we look here, we can see that we have two nodes. We have an in and we have an out. So the in is coming off the timeline, and then the out is going back onto the timeline. All the stuff between these two connectors is what then gets displayed on the timeline, or the modifications with that clip that get displayed on the timeline. If we look at the Fusion comp itself, what we'll notice is it just has an out because it doesn't have any media in yet. So Fusion has the ability to do a lot of things. One, you can just come into your media pool, you can pull a clip in, and now we have access to that whole clip. Over here in the inspector, we have the ability to change all of the different, where it starts, where it ends, and so forth. As you can see here, we have the full resolution, and then that will then get displayed as 1080 on the actual timeline. Next, let's talk about the viewers. So you can either have one viewer like this, where it just shows one, or you can have it two viewers like this. Down here, you'll see there's two little things. So that's just showing the different viewers. There's a couple different ways you can have it displayed. You can drag it up. Once you release, then it shows it there. Or you could hit one or two. This one's one, this one's two. And you can display anything you want. So I could display the second image. So if I just grab a node here, connect this up, change the color, we have one over here, or we can display this one. All right. These that go across the top here, these are kind of commonly used tools across all different projects that you would do. They're just kind of common used tools. If you want to access all of the tools, there's a couple of different ways you can do that. You can come up to the effects library, you can come into tools. It's broken down into different categories. And in each category, so let's go to a blur. We have a ton of different types of blur here, but they're all pretty much a blur, and so forth. And we can come into, let's do like particles. Here are all the different types of particles, but then here you'll see a couple of like little particles, right? So we have some over here, we have some here, but here is all of them. In the effects library is going to be all of your tools. The other way of getting to tools is you can right click, you can go to add tool, and here are the same categories. We can go through here and say, okay, let's get a blur effect, let's get a glow. We can bring that in. The last way that you can do this, and this one is going to be the most used once you're familiar with it because it's the fastest. It's holding down shift and hitting spacebar, which then allows you to search something. So we could search that same glow, and then we have a couple of different glows in here. We can grab a glow, and there we go. Now we have another glow. And with the tools, there's always a ton of different ways you can come to the same results. So you could watch one tutorial about doing a specific effect, and they might use a different set of tools than maybe a different one, or they have the nodes arranged in different ways. There isn't any one right way to do it, there's just different ways of doing it. When you're working with the tools, it just takes a little bit of time to understand how they work. There is a general idea of nodes. Like you can see here, we have this blue, which is typically like a mask. And that allows you to mask whatever the image is. So let's grab a rectangle mask and let's look at our shot here. I can mask just that little portion. I can move my mask around. So just that little portion's used. And then I can take that mask over here and we can see that we have that same effect. And then let's say we took this and we piped it in here and we viewed it. Now let's make this a little smaller so we can actually see this a little bit better. And we can see if we come into the glow, we can increase this glow, right? And then we could take, let's say, the ellipse tool and bring it into here. And then we could say, okay, we want just that glow just to be with inside that ellipse. So you could do that as well. So there's a ton of different things that you can do. And like the rectangle, then we could have it move around, but then that glows only within that ellipse tool, which is over here. Cool thing with nodes is you can connect them. So I could say, okay, I want this one rectangle to only do that little area that's right there. And because the glow typically goes outside of the borders, for this particular thing, it doesn't really make much sense other than probably brightening a little bit. Not even so much that. I would have to probably bump this up quite a bit to get it brighter. But you see the idea here. Because it's masked, it's only going to be within that, but a glow typically is only present when it's like outside of that area. That's the idea with a glow. It's almost like a type of blur. So yeah, so we have that. And we have all of these other tools here, so we could grab like the text. Let's say we want to add text. But then we have this, all of this going on here. So we have this glowing bar, almost like a lightsaber. And we want to add maybe some text on top of all of it. So we would have to come into here, and we have a merge. And if we hover over this, we will see that this is the background for the merge. And then this is the foreground for the merge. So we could connect the glow maybe into the background. So currently that's what we see. And then we could grab the foreground, the text here, and then we can come in here and type something in. If we make that viewed, we could then move the text, and now we can see we have the text over top of the glow. Just another short little thing, if you hit Control T, it'll flip. So we see we have the text tool as now as the background, and then we have that glow image on above that. Now if we were to take this and let's bring in, let's bring this in like that, then we could add the glow in after, and now we have them both glowing. Or we could come in here and we could flip it, and now it's behind it. As you can see, it's behind it, and we have everything glowing. So that's kind of how they work. And then you also have in the inspector a ton of different tools. So this controls, currently we have this highlighted, as you can see here. We have it highlighted, and we can change the position. Now, if you look at this, we might be saying, oh, we're only changing the position of one thing. And that's because everything that comes into the merge as a foreground element, we are then saying over here, how are we going to apply whatever is coming in through the foreground connector to the background? So we have a ton of different blend modes that we can put in here. We have the ability to spin it, right? We have the ability to change the size of it, and this is all for the foreground. So if I was to turn it and do this, and then if I hit Control T to flip them, we can see like now it flipped it, and now the control is this because we're modifying this on top of the other thing. So yeah, without going too far into it, that's kind of how they work. And then we still have all of these ellipse, and we can say, okay, that's getting added, but then we're applying it. So now how is it being affected? So we can see now it's only inside of here that is being added in. And now showing this, you can easily get very confused in what am I doing? Why am I doing it? Sort of thing. But the idea here is that we're taking nodes, we're connecting them. You can always hover over a connector to see what type of connector it is. Like even when we get into here, then we have all different types of connectors. And now this is all for a material that we would be making, which is like a completely different thing. We can add, this is like when it gets into 3D and 3D stuff, different models and different things like that. We can make our own materials and how those materials get applied onto stuff. But if you're ever curious, like with anything in Fusion, you can just hover over and it'll tell you what that particular connector is for. And now if we take a node and we bring it in, so like this merge, this is a P merge. As you can see, this is a normal 2D merge. This is a P merge. The other thing we could do is we could do there is also a 3D merge, right? And the idea here is that you can't connect things up that don't make sense. So a 3D merge, you're going to take a whole bunch of 3D elements and then merge them together. A P merge, anything with a P is going to be a particle system. That was these couple here that are particle system. You can also right click, add tool, and then you can come into particles, and there's a ton of different particles. They all have a small P in front of them, so it kind of gives you an idea of those. But so there might be some nodes that you try to connect and you're like, oh, why can't I connect it? It's because they're looking for a very specific type of node tool that gets connected into it. Obviously, we can't take an image like this and connect it as a particle merge because it's looking for other either particle emitters or some type of way in which that we're going to affect particles with energy or something of that nature. And with a merge 3D, we're looking for 3D elements to bring in. And that's like a whole nother thing in how 3D works and adding different elements or different materials or textures onto 3D elements. And then in 3D you have cameras and lights. The majority of these are all for 2D. You have a ton of other tools here. Like I said, you can right click and you can see all these different tools. Each tool has different stuff that you have here to change, but you also have other like tabs, I guess you could say, to switch between and add even more settings in there. Like for instance, this text tool, it has a whole bunch of other settings within it. And then on top of that, I made a whole video on just this particular tool itself. But as you see, the modifier here is currently grayed out. Each value, you can add some type of a modifier onto it. So you're modifying the value that that particular value has. You're taking a value and you're modifying its value with a modifier, if that makes sense. But here's the easiest way to view this. So let's say I just have my text here. I right click here. I then have all of my different types of modifiers I can add. One that I like to show off because it makes it's easiest. It's the easiest thing to understand is the character level styling. And just like the name says, for each character, we can change its style. So now I come over into modifiers because now it's active, and I can highlight a particular character, and let's say I change its font, right, and change its size. And I can come over here and change that particular one's color, and then I can pick a couple of others and change their color, and come in and change their style, right? And then I can also come over to styling and I can add styling effects. Just like over here, when I came into shading, I have a whole bunch of other elements that I can add in. In here, for that particular one, I can add in and turn on and add some like outline to that, change the thickness of that outline. There's a ton of different things that you can do. But it's just one of those things with time, you'll start to understand it. But when you connect nodes, for the most part, the grays are going to be, or excuse me, the blues are going to be the masks for the most part. And then yellows are going to be like a primary connector. Greens are going to be like a secondary connector. As we can see, the primary is the background, and then we also have the merge. So like before, I pulled the merge out. You don't really have to do that. If you have two nodes that only can really connect via a merge. So like, let's say we take this background and I want to put the text on top of the background, right? So let's say we just have these two. I have my background. Let's just make it a full background. Then I have my text, right? So here is my text. Let's bring it over here. And there is my background. Now I want to add my text on top of my background. So I could come out of my text and I could drop it on the out of the background, and it makes a merge with the text as the foreground, and the merge has it set up correctly automatically. So these are like little things in there that make things a little easier. The other thing too is if you have something selected and then you click, it's going to automatically add that on to the end, if it makes sense. If I click this and click this button, it's going to add it onto here because a merge typically, or excuse me, a mask typically gets added onto that element and not after that element. So different things like that make life a little easier. Like I said, this is the beginning of your timeline, and you can change this obviously, and that's the end. And then here is going to be where your playhead is. If you ever want to move your playhead, you just click in here and drag, and the orange is the playhead itself. If you're working with different keyframes, so let's say we take this text, right? Say we take the text and we move it over and we grab in a transform and we connect this up, right? So now a transform, what that enables me to do is now I can move it, right? So what I gotta do is I can bring it over here and I can click center, and that's going to add a keyframe right there. And what keyframe means is that at this point, I want this particular value. So I move it here, and because keyframes are already active, I can then just move this, and it's going to say at that time, which is frame 140, I want these values to be present. And now what it's going to do is in between these two, it's going to go from one to the other. As you can see, we have this line here. So before, there's no movement because there's no keyframe in front of this. So once we get to this keyframe, then from here to here, we're going to go from the one value to the other value. And that's just a straight line. There's a lot of other things you can do here. So this is just going to be a very, very linear move. But with keyframes, you can add in what a lot of people know as easing. So that's where it goes really fast, and then once it gets to the end, it slows down. Or it starts up really slow and then it goes really fast, that sort of thing. So if I click on my spline, and we can click this little button to get a little bit of room but still have it open there, we have that transform, which is where we're working at. We have the center, which is this, but because we have two locations, it added in a modifier, which is the displace modifier, which then takes it from one to the other. So now we have that here. And if I click this button, now we have these two, and we can grab one, and we have a handle. Now we can move the handle around, and we can set like how fast or the easing in of one to the other. So we could do something like that. So now we had that very linear move. Now it's going to move very quick and then slow down and be really soft, right? We can also make this a little easier. If I highlight both of them, clicking this little button will show all of your keyframes. So like, let's say you have some keyframes all over the place. You click that little button, it centers all of the keyframes that are on whatever you're working with. You can highlight, and if I hit Control L, it turns them back to linear. And let's say I just highlight the one and hit F, it's going to flatten. And if I do Control T, it's going to bring up easing. Now these are kind of getting into a little bit more advanced, but now we can increase that easing in. So we're easing into that keyframe. And now if we watch this, it'll go and then really smoothly slow down. We could increase that even more. So it goes in really slow and soft. But yeah, there's a ton of tools. You can do a ton of different things. The idea with this video is just to give you some ideas of how the tools kind of work together without going into each tool. Each tool is a 10 to 15 minute video on every setting that there is. But just remember that each tool has a bunch of settings. Sometimes they have multiple pages or tabs or whatever you want to call them that you could go into and play around with. They all do different things. And then each value, you can add in different modifiers. As you can see, we have some modifiers here. In this one, we have different modifiers. So let's come back into this one. And we could come in and let's say for the rotation or the angle, we could come in and modify it with, let's do shake, right? And we come over to the modifiers and we have right here, shake on the transform angle, which was that. And then we can say the min and max. So we could say the minimum is 0, sure, but the maximum is 360, right? And then a level of smoothness that we want. And now it will randomly start spinning, right? And we can bring this down or make this amount a bit less to go in between each one. And we can see there, let's bring this way up to make it even smoother. But now we have some type of rotation going, and we have a minimum and a maximum value. And then now we have a minimum maximum value. We could right click on this and we could add another modifier onto a modifier. So now the minimum value, we could add a shake onto the minimum value as well and say the minimum value is 100, and we could say the maximum value is 190, right? So then the minimum and maximum value, oh, I'm looking at the wrong one here. So shake on shake, geez, sorry about that. So we could say the minimum is 180 and the maximum is 190. So now the minimum and maximum, as you can see down here, if we just look down here, it's shaking back and forth between those different values. So you could just keep adding a value on a value on a value. And in a lot of my tutorials, I do kind of different things like this to get really cool effects, but I know that it can be very scary or you can't understand it. but just know that it's not super difficult once you understand how nodes connect. Each node is different, and that the values on the nodes do different things within that node, and that you can add on modifiers to almost every value, and that you have the spline here. And I didn't even go into keyframes, but keyframes are just kind of like the timeline of a particular comp, Fusion comp that you're working on. And you can say when things start, when they end. You can shift a whole set of keyframes left or right. But yeah, I think that this is probably already scary enough for someone jumping in, but at least it gives you an idea. Going around a little bit more, down here we have the amount of RAM that we're currently using. So 20% of the allocated RAM that I have for my current project to use, it is being used 20%, and that's just saying that 13 gigs is currently being used. If you ever want to, you can right click and you can cache the purge. Down here it has a little warning, and that's just saying different things that have occurred. This is called the console. So sometimes if you're ever having an issue, it'll say what kind of errors that have occurred. A lot of the time the errors that occur here are just because the way in which you're building things, an error will jump up in here. But sometimes it's good to be able to problem solve, like, oh, maybe I connected things the wrong way, or maybe what I'm having it do, it can't get a particular value in there. You'll get a better understanding when you're trying to problem solve. That's more of like an advanced thing to be concerned with. But yeah, without getting too in depth, hopefully that kind of gave you an overall idea, and I didn't lose too many people there. I kind of feel like now that I'm towards the end of this video that I did, but hopefully it at least helped you out. I don't want people to be afraid of learning Fusion, because there's so much that is possible within the free version of DaVinci Resolve and the free version of Fusion that is in the free version of DaVinci Resolve. Hopefully you guys found this somewhat interesting and somewhat helpful. I think I'm going to do a bunch of videos more towards like the super basics, just getting in. Maybe I just need to re-go over a couple of these beginner YouTube videos with DaVinci Resolve 16, because I know some things are a little bit different. I know that some of my entry videos in the past were working with the very start of Fusion being implemented into DaVinci Resolve. So I was doing some stuff, jumping back and forth between the standalone Fusion and coming back into DaVinci Resolve for some stuff. But yeah, there is a little bit of a learning curve there, but once you learn it, you can pretty much make anything that you would really want to make. And I just kind of want to show the pure power of the free version of DaVinci Resolve, just because it's kind of insane what you have the ability to do with just this program if you spend a little bit of time and learn. But yeah, that's kind of all I got. Give me some feedback. And with that being said, my name's JR. Have a good one. Stay safe.